Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. This time we're going to talk about the Colt Double Eagle, one of Colt's many attempts at producing a double action, single action semi-automatic pistol. This one based closely on the 1911. Before we get into that, I'd like to thank my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, there is a link in the description below. All of this costs money, and your contributions help more than you know. I'd also like to thank Steve for allowing me to show you his gun and talk about it, and the other channel benefactors who have been very generous with donations of ammunition, guns to talk about, and their time. So, the Colt Double Eagle is a product of the 1980s, the very end of the 1980s. It was in production from 1989 to 1997. And it owes a lot to the 1911. It uses many of the same parts as the 1911. The slide assembly, in fact, is identical to a 1911, and you can put it right on one and it'll be just fine. Operation is double action, single action. So your first shot is double action, which is a pretty nice double action trigger pull for a semi-automatic pistol. And of course, then after that, the hammer resets, and you have a very nice, short, very tactile and audible reset, followed by a nice single action trigger pull. And one might think, as Colt did, that with commonality of magazines and other parts and the Colt name, that this would have been a great success, and it wasn't, for reasons we'll get into later. But first, let's have a look at this beastie on the tabletop. The Double Eagle was available in a variety of calibers. This one is a 45, and as you can see, it is the same size as a full-size 1911 and actually feels a bit heavier. But the ergonomics are not nearly so nice as the 1911. As you can see from the location of the magazine release, here at the very bottom of the back of the trigger guard, and here kind of towards the middle, that you grip this gun much lower on the frame. And comparing the safeties, line up the slides, you can see that the Double Eagle is much lower, and when firing it, I did notice that it is enough lower that it tends to magnify the muzzle flip, which is not a happy thing. And you can see a lot of the parts are exactly the same. Magazine well housing, slide release, the entire slide assembly is straight 1911, and you can in fact stick it right onto a 1911. For controls, we have the magazine release, the standard 1911 slide release, and this, which is the decocker. And it all works just fine. Now, I did have some problem with janky primers on my hand loads in the shooting video, but the second section of the shooting video with factory ammo went flawlessly. The double action trigger system is similar to the C-Camp conversion of the 1911 to double action, but it is not identical and was in fact not designed by C-Camp. The sights, as you can see, are pretty much bog standard GI, although it does have a white dot front sight and the white dots on the rear sight, but the blade is very similar to a GI blade. As I said, the double action trigger pull is quite nice. The reset is very short, and the single action trigger pull is pretty good, probably 3 3/4 or 4 pounds. And both hard and easy to say why this was not a success. So you have to recall that at the time this was introduced, the Smith & Wesson 4506 was significantly cheaper and was better, and the Sig Sauer P220 was comparable in price, and it was better. What makes them better? Well, for one thing, I am not taking these grip panels off, because there are parts and springs that when you take the grip panels off, they want to leave. And this is not my gun, and I don't know how available spare parts are because they were never particularly popular. But if those parts leave, I'm not entirely sure we can get them back. I also want to say that using the extended grip to cover the action bar and its actuating spring is kind of crappy. It's janky as hell. It feels jury-rigged. And that's really not what you want on something that is a fairly expensive gun. Oh, and one other thing, this is just a plastic insert. There is no grip safety because they felt with the double action operation, it was not necessary. And honestly, the parts that aren't 1911 look kind of cheap. Like this plain stamped hammer drop. It's just the whole gun, when you get into the details of it, like this extension, and if I take it off, the way springs and other parts want to just leave, it's not up to the standard of even its own time. As I say, you have to remember that by 1990, you could get 4506, Cigar P220, and they were all better guns than this. It's not that this is a bad gun. It's just, it feels like what it is. They took something old and tried to update it into something new, and they did it in kind of a janky makeshift way. Now, there is a second version of this gun where they have a plate under the grips covering the mechanism, which they should have had from the beginning. But even that is just a stopgap. It is not, this is an adapted gun, and such is not going to compete with a purpose-built gun. Also, it loses the look of the 1911, which I'm sure their marketing was hoping to play into, was the connection to the 1911. But by having the trigger guard completely reshaped and located much lower, and the overall worse ergonomics and therefore firing qualities, it just didn't have much of a chance. And I'm not going to take it apart because it takes apart exactly like a 1911 for field stripping. So it was kind of a half-hearted attempt, and it was really too little too late. In addition to all the standard 1911 calibers, 9mm, 38 Super, 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP, and 10mm, there were three different versions of this gun. There was a compact version they called the Commander. Great imagination there. And there was a officer's model version. And again, none of these were successful. The officer's model version did differ from this in that it had an alloy frame. And the various calibers were available in various size iterations of this. I don't think all of them were available in any gun but the full-size gun. And this gun had come out in 1938. It might have been a big hit. In 1989, with so many better and often cheaper options, it's close, but it's just not finished enough, not developed enough, and it was not competitive. Now, of course, today these are collectible because they were unsuccessful, so there weren't that many of them. I have no idea what you pay for them. I didn't look it up. They are out there. They are available. The most common are the stainless full-size guns. Second most is the Commander, and as I understand it, the rarest is the officer's model size. And again, this was not Colt's first or last attempt at producing a modern double-action, single-action gun, including things like licensing the CZ 75, the 45 caliber version of it, attempting to license a South African Beretta Model 92 clone in 45 ACP, and before this they'd attempted a new service pistol, double action, single action, in 1971, and none of them worked for them. Now, of course, by the 90s, Colt was not doing that great, and they continued not doing that great in the subsequent decades. Oh, the magazine, by the way, I do not know if this is the original magazine, but it holds 8 rounds. So, overall, it was just a few decades too late to have the innovation required to make people put up with the problems and makeshift nature of it. Still, it's not a bad gun. It wasn't awful to fire. Does have exaggerated muzzle flip because of the high bore axis. But the feeling when it was introduced, I think, was that it was just not right. And maybe not a Colt. And it's hard to argue with that at this later date. Anyway, the Colt Double Eagle, it is what it is. Or it is what it was. Anyway, if you like the video, please hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. I hope this finds you well. Stay safe, take care, and we'll talk to you again real soon.